urinary system is that part of your body that's responsible for filtering out different types of waste products from your blood and then concentrating those waste products in a fluid called urine to evacuate them from the body. And the urinary system consists of not too many parts to it. It contains 2 kidneys, the tubes called the ureters, which connect the kidneys to the bladder, and then a small tube called the urethra, which allows for fluid, the urine, to exit the body. So again, the primary purpose of the urinary system is to get rid of waste products, to filter waste products out of the blood, to remove toxins, poisons, even to remove things like antibiotics that are in the blood. And also, this is something you may not know that the urinary system does, but it's actually really critically important to helping to maintain homeostasis in the body, and it maintains a number of different homeostatic set points, including helping to regulate the pH of the blood, which is somewhere between 7.35 and 7.45. It helps to regulate the levels of different electrolytes in the blood, such as sodium, calcium, and potassium, and phosphorus. It helps to maintain blood pressure indirectly because it helps to maintain the volume of the blood. In other words, if, for example, I create a larger volume of urine, that means I'm taking more fluid from the blood, so the blood pressure would drop because the blood volume has dropped. And oddly enough, this may come as somewhat of a surprise, but it does contribute somewhat to regulating the oxygen and carbon dioxide content of the blood. Now, the urinary system is also closely linked to the reproductive system, particularly in males, because the urethra, the tube that connects the bladder to the outside world, is also used for the transport of sperm in addition to being used as a way to transport urine out of the body. Okay, so again, the pieces and parts that make up the urinary system include the kidneys, which are paired organs. They are retroperitoneal, meaning behind your peritoneum and small, large intestine and other digestive organs. They have immediately above them, you will recall from our studies of the endocrine system, they have those adrenal glands immediately superior. The urinary system also includes the ureters. As I mentioned before, those are the tubes that take urine down to the bladder, where it is stored until it is evacuated from the body via the urethra. And just as a review, hopefully you remember the special type of epithelial cells that line the bladder. Those are those transitional epithelial cells, which have the ability to stretch as the bladder stretches and then to recoil as the bladder empties. So let's look at some of the different types of things that the kidneys do. Again, the primary thing that they're all about is filtering out different metabolic waste products such as nitrogenous waste from the blood. And we're going to spend a good bit of time later on in this lecture discussing exactly how that happens, how it is that we filter waste products out of the blood plasma. Another thing that the kidneys do, again, is to control blood volume and therefore influence blood pressure, because if I choose to allow larger amounts of fluid to exit out of the blood and create urine, that means I'm going to lower blood volume, and vice versa. If I decide not to use a lot of fluid in the forming urine, then the result is blood volume stays higher and blood pressure thus stays higher. Another thing that kidneys do is they manufacture a hormone called renin. And renin is an interesting hormone because renin is used to help convert an inactive enzyme called angiotensinogen into an active enzyme called angiotensin 1. And angiotensin 1 then is circulated through the lungs, where another enzyme called angiotensin converting enzyme, or ACE, converts it into angiotensin 2, and then angiotensin 2 directly does a number of things, such as causes vasoconstriction system-wide, which helps increase blood pressure. It also causes the kidneys to become responsive to aldosterone. And remember, again, aldosterone is all about making sure that the kidneys hold on to sodium, and if they hold on to sodium, they also hold on to water, and that too elevates blood pressure by elevating blood volume. And lastly, angiotensin 2 also stimulates that thirst response in the hypothalamus to get an individual to drink more fluid to, again, help increase blood volume and thus blood pressure. Kidneys also secrete erythropoietin. You will recall from our study of the blood that erythropoietin is that hormone that stimulates red blood cell production. Kidneys also help to regulate carbon dioxide balance and blood pH. They aren't the only organs that are involved in helping to regulate blood pH and carbon dioxide levels. We will also learn in much more depth when we get to the respiratory system that the lungs have a pretty strong influence on blood pH and carbon dioxide levels in the blood. And lastly, another thing the kidneys do is during a time if an individual is undergoing starvation, the kidneys can employ gluconeogenesis, that process by which they can take amino acids and lipids and use them as building blocks to manufacture new molecules of glucose. And they do that, for example, with amino acids by removing the NH2 or the amine group off of the amino acids. They concentrate that into something or they convert that, into something called ammonia, which is then secreted out in the urine. And what's left of the amino acid after that is then further altered in order to manufacture molecules of glucose. Now let's talk for a second about the different types of metabolic waste products that the kidneys are interested in filtering out of your blood. When your cells in your body are undergoing normal metabolic activity, okay, they're using glucose, they're manufacturing ATP, they're making proteins and all kinds of other kinds of molecules, a very common category of waste products from those manufacturers are different types of nitrogenous waste. Now, within the category of nitrogenous waste products, there are several different types. The most common of which, the one we find in the greatest concentration in the blood, is something called urea, and it has a chemical formula that looks like this over here. And urea constitutes about 50% of all of the nitrogenous waste products you see in the blood, and it is a byproduct from the breakdown of proteins. Okay, from protein catabolism is how we make urea. Now, when we break down protein initially, we actually first manufacture something called ammonia, which is the same stuff you find in cleaning products. And that ammonia is very toxic, and your liver then takes that ammonia and converts it into urea, what you see over here. And that's much less toxic, and this urea is then secreted into the blood where it finally comes in contact with the kidneys and gets filtered out and placed into the forming urine. Another common nitrogenous waste product you see are uric acids, and uric acids are produced from the breakdown of nucleic acids such as RNA and DNA. Uric acids look something like this. Another type of nitrogenous waste product you will sometimes see is creatinine. And it is found from the breakdown of creatinine phosphate. If you remember, creatinine phosphate was one of the phosphorus or phosphate donators that we use for immediate manufacture of ATP in muscle tissue. That one is also, again, a commonly seen nitrogenous waste product. Okay. Now, here's a question. Obviously, the main purpose of the kidneys is to filter out these nitrogenous waste products. And the question is, well, what would happen if those kidneys stopped functioning properly? What if they didn't filter out nitrogenous waste products as they were supposed to? Well, you would begin to get a buildup of nitrogenous waste products in the blood. That's a condition called azotemia. And if it's left long enough untreated, you will eventually progress to a disorder called uremia. And this condition is associated with eventually, if it's not treated, with death, coma and death, but it can cause all kinds of things like shortness of breath, cardiac arrhythmias, vomiting, convulsions, etc. Okay, so uremia is when I get an excess buildup of nitrogenous waste products in the blood to the point where it's at toxic levels. So the whole purpose of the kidneys is to excrete these nitrogenous waste products. And I want to talk for a second about what I mean by excrete, because sometimes people confuse the term excrete with eliminate. Now, when you eat food and that food passes through your esophagus into your stomach, into your small intestine, into your large intestine, and then out of the body as feces, what is passed out of the body is eliminated. Okay, it's what you eliminate is what you didn't use, okay? That's different from excretion. In excretion, I am actively taking a fluid, in this case blood plasma, and I am actively separating out the nitrogenous waste products and getting rid of them. Okay, that's different from having food that passes through, and some parts of the food that passes through aren't absorbed or used, so they just pass all the way through the body as feces. Notice there I'm not actively separating this from that. I'm just allowing something to pass through. Okay, so make sure you're clear on the difference between excretion and elimination. Now, your kidneys aren't the only organ in your body that have the ability to excrete waste products. Your skin actually excretes quite a bit too. It excretes water filtered from blood plasma, and along with that water comes some salts such as sodium and sodium chloride, for example, in different electrolytes, sodium and chloride and potassium and calcium. Lactic acid from the blood also gets filtered out on the skin, and that creates that lactic acid mantle that you learned about in 201, that coating of lactic acid on the surface of your skin that helps to inhibit pathogenic bacterial growth. And your skin also has a limited ability to excrete urea. In fact, in individuals who have kidney shutdown, you will very frequently, they will begin to smell a little bit like urea because their skin starts to try to excrete some of the excess nitrogenous waste compounds out of the body, since the kidneys are unable to do it. Your lungs also, by definition, excrete substances. In this case, they excrete primarily carbon dioxide and water. Again, they are actively separating that out from the blood and eliminating it from the body, or I should say excreting that from the body. And again, the kidneys, the things that they excrete include those different nitrogenous waste products such as urea, uric acid, creatinine. They also excrete toxins you might come in contact with, drugs that you take in. They do excrete different hormones, sodiums, chlorides, potassiums, phosphorus, calcium all get excreted. Water obviously gets excreted. That's what makes urine very fluid-like. And this is why the kidneys can influence the pH of the blood. The kidneys can also preferentially excrete or not excrete hydrogen ions, and we know that pH is directly related to the quantity of hydrogen ions present. Next thing I want to go over is to start looking at some of the anatomy of the urinary organs. And we're going to start with the kidneys because they by far have the most complex anatomy of any of the parts of the urinary system. And I'm going to start looking at it at the gross anatomy, and then on the next lecture we'll start looking more closely at some of the microscopic anatomy. If we were to take a cross-section of a kidney, as you see here, we would see that immediately surrounding the kidneys is a very, very thin layer of tissue called the renal fascia. And that immediately under that is a fatty tissue layer called the adipose capsule. And then under that is another thin layer of tissue called the renal capsule, and that is basically the outermost part of the kidney. Okay. Now, in terms of the parts of the kidney from a gross scale, let's take a look at this. You can see that there are these pyramid-shaped regions of tissue inside of this kidney. Those are called the medullary pyramids. Sometimes they're called the renal pyramids. It means the same thing. That between the renal pyramids and also every place else around here, you can see, That is all renal cortex. Okay, that's all renal cortex. We have something called renal papilla, and hold on one second. Those renal papilla are located right down in this area here, and they are little collection points for forming urine. And that forming urine then goes into these light-colored finger-like objects, which are called minor calyces. Minor calyx would be singular. Calyces is plural. Two or more minor calyces merge together to form a major calyx, which would be right in this area, major calyx. And then all of the major calyces join together, and they form the renal column. I'm sorry, they form the renal pelvis here. And I'm trying to look to see where that is on our list here. Yeah, there it is, renal pelvis. Okay, so when two or more major calyces join together, they form the renal pelvis right here. And the renal pelvis directly connects with this tube-like structure here that we call the ureter. Additionally, on this slide, there is a term called renal column. A renal column is simply the tissue in between two renal pyramids. So it's this stuff in here is a renal column between the renal pyramids. The renal column is made up of cortex tissue. Then there are all of these different types of blood vessels that we're going to get in more detail, learn about more detail in just a minute. But they do include an incoming renal artery and an outgoing renal vein. And if you can hang tight, I think in a minute we'll get to another slide where I can talk about the lobar and the interlobar and the arcuate vessels. So here we go. Here is all the other blood vessels. Let's imagine that you are a blood cell and you are about ready to enter the kidneys through the renal artery. And let's chart your path of where you're going to go. You're going to start it, and that's what this pathway does over here for you. All this over here is going to take us through this. So we're going to start out at a renal artery, and we're going to break off into what's called a lobar artery. In other words, an artery that leads to one of the lobes in the kidney. From here, we're going to go up between two lobes. That's called an interlobar artery. And then we are going to go over the arch over the top here of the renal pyramid. That's called a arcuate artery. Next up, I'm going to split off of here this way, and I'm going to become an interlobular. Notice it says interlobular, not interlobar. Difference there. Artery. And then that's going to break off into smaller, little tiny arterioles called the afferent arteriole. And we're going to learn in a little bit that's going to lead into something called a glomerulus. Then it's going to come out of a glomerulus into an efferent arteriole. It's going to pass through something called peritubular capillaries. And I promise you these terms here will make more sense on the next lecture when we start talking about the microscopic parts of the kidney. Once I'm through the peritubular capillaries, then I start doing a reverse process from what I've done so far. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to come back in through an interlobular vein up here, okay? And then I'm going to go through an arcuate vein. Maybe I should do a different color here. Let's do blue. Okay, I'm going to go in through an interlobular vein to an arcuate vein. I'm going to go through an interlobar vein back down to a lobar vein, out through the renal vein, and then to the inferior vena cava. So that's all of part one of this lecture. The next part, we're going to start really looking more at the microscopic anatomy and physiology of the kidneys.